If you think about any game, any activity, there's some sort of point to it. You're trying to solve some type of problem. There are games where you're trying to collect things, or there's all this information and you need to think strategically and sort of apply different ideas of logic to unscramble it and solve it. There's competitive games where you need to outsmart other people or do something faster. So it's really isolating what is it in a particular game that simulates the dynamic in the workplace and giving that experience for a team to do something together, to have a shared experience together without any real life repercussion. Psychological safety, but it's almost like a controlled experiment for how you work together. And some people could be a little bit uncomfortable with it as at first. I mean, part of the structure process is if there's a team that's really struggling, you don't jump right in and do a really hard and really competitive game. You want to start with something that's team bonding to get people to feel psychologically safe, to get them to feel open to the idea of learning and changing their behavior in the first place. And so, for that, maybe you're picking 2 or 3 games to go down the iceberg and tackle some of the more superficial elements of the challenge before you get to the really meaty, important one.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of the Freedom of Work podcast. I'm joined with Alex, and we're going to be talking all about leveraging structured games to improve team dynamics. So, if you'd like to jump into it, introduce yourself and see sort of why we're going to be speaking about this topic today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, excited for this conversation. Most people have to work. It's a given for financial reasons. And the vast majority of jobs, even in this AI world, still involve working with other people. And most employers, most learning and development programs, most education programs of any kind don't really focus on how to work with other people. Everything from the basic self-awareness to understand your own behavioral patterns and your own preferences to how do you communicate? How do you read other people's behavior? What are strategies for helping people deal with the emotional experience of work? And games are a perfect tool for exploring that because you're solving problems with other people. So I became really passionate about how do you make work a more connected and meaningful experience for other people where you don't see your colleagues as your adversaries. You actually see them as your teammates, as your allies, as positive forces in your life. And so bringing games, bringing play into the workspace is a great way to get several levels of benefits
Yeah,
uh, towards better team and better performance.
exactly. I think people sort of love games, everyone likes getting involved in them, but just sort of adding that element to the workplace, which is something that, may become a little bit boring, may become a little bit repetitive. Adding something like this into it is such a good element to be able to find out, things like how they work, engagement, and things like that. So, I'm really excited to go into this. But I think it would be great if we delved into the definition of what this podcast is called. So, structured games. So, do you want to sort of tell us what we mean by this? So, let's delve into that.
Yeah, the structured element doesn't refer to the game itself, but how it's facilitated, how it's played. I'm sure we've all been through really awkward, forced fun experiences at work sometime where somebody thought something was a good idea. Maybe it's at a retreat and they bring an activity in and it falls flat and people feel very uncomfortable. That's unstructured. When it wasn't really well thought out. What's the activity? Is it a good fit for this particular group at this particular time? What do we want people's attention focused on while they're playing? What type of outcomes do we want to get from it? So what my company called Barometer XP has done is look at how do you set up, how do you design experiences around games so that you're specifically targeting different goals and growth outcomes for a team, and really pulling on the elements of each game to make it meaningful to the people who are going to be playing.
Yeah, I think that's such a great thing to add into it. It's making the game effective to be able to add the outcomes into every day-to-day life of people's work. And is there a way that you'd sort of, or how would you first sort of go about this? How would you maybe create games and tailor them to like different teams or needs? What's the sort of starting process of this?
Yeah, we have three different types of criteria that we look at. The first, we call it the iceberg. It's three different levels of depth that you can get through play. And so first is understanding, what is a group looking for? Are they just looking for some fun, some shared joy, an opportunity to get to know each other as humans, not just within their roles and responsibilities, which is really important for building trust, building social capital, creating psychological safety. And we call that team bonding. That's the top level of the iceberg. That's, above the surface, because that's what we think of when we're playing games. The level down a little bit deeper is called team building. And that's where you're adding in an element of reflective discussion to the experience to look at, how did different people show up? What behavior patterns did I notice in myself? What behavior patterns did I notice about you? Maybe I realized that you are much more detailed and strategic than I am. And maybe that's why we tend to butt heads in the context of our work. But now that I understand that we just think and solve problems really differently, we can then work on communicating better so that our relationship is more positive, and more effective going forward. And then the deepest level is, we call it team development. So you have team bonding, team building, and team development. And that's where you're looking to make some sort of change at the team level, whether it's a process improvement or culture change, or um, realigning different roles and responsibilities. And so you're playing with the game towards the eye of, how are we performing here? What tools, what norms, what assumptions would help us perform better? And play is a great way to explore and practice that.
Good.
So that's the first lens, is figuring out, how deep do you want to go with this experience?
Yeah, that's such like a great starting point. I think all three are very important. Team bonding is I think what people maybe initially think of, it's like building trust, making sure people are comfortable with each other, communication, and making more of, as it is, a bond with your colleagues. But I think if you, as you said, sort of go deeper and find out what you're wanting to get out of it, the building side of things with, yeah, if you solve a problem differently to somebody else, you're realizing that's why you're not working together on a certain project or a certain task. And I think it's really important to then improve how that team functions and how it works, which helps with the overall goal of the project, what needed to be complete. So I think that's really interesting way to sort of divide it down. And then obviously the development side, because then that helps with your individual performance, like adaptability, growth, goals, which all is to do with your initial career and why you're wanting to work that role. So I really like that element, and it pulls in those different reasons of why this is going to be a great thing to be able to progress and develop internally and as an individual as well. So I really like that. And do you have any sort of examples that you can share that of perhaps a game that has showed effective communication or trust building or collaboration, just so we can sort of get a visual of that?
Yeah, absolutely. A few months ago, I was part of a team facilitating a 3-day retreat for a company that developed software products, enterprise software. And there were about 90 people at the retreat, and most of them had their whole intact teams there. So there were product developers, product owners, designers, marketing people. And so they played different games within their intact teams, because they wanted to help them figure out how to work together better. And we played a game called The Mind. That's a really amazing nonverbal communication game. You basically there's a deck of cards, and each card has a number from 1 to 100. And everybody gets one card. And without talking, without gesturing, without signaling about your numbers, you have to play the cards in order from lowest to highest. So it's really about reading people's nonverbal language and getting a sense of people's risk tolerance and how they pace themselves. And the insights that came out of it which sound really simple, but were actually really profound, was the people who were more extroverted felt really uncomfortable because there were no words. And they really, they just wanted to jump in and get things done really quickly. The introverts, who a lot of these people were, I would say 2/3 of the people on these teams were introverts because they were from, the more tech side. And they loved it because it gave them time to think, it gave them time to notice other dynamics, and not immediately get distracted by a conversation. And the introverts realized that it wasn't that they were being shut out of the conversations. It was just that the extroverts needed to process information out loud, which was then assumed to be them wanting to dominate the conversation. And the extroverts realize how much they're missing out on by just jumping in and talking and not really paying attention to the dynamics. And that was pretty radical for those teams. It was, you could kind of see the light bulbs go off in their heads as they then talked about, and this is the real point of it, talked about, well, how do you leverage this information, this new understanding you have of each other in your work? And they had conversations about sharing information ahead of time so people can process it before you or need to discuss it, structuring their meetings differently, thinking about how people request information from each other. And not only did they have those realizations, but they were really excited to be part of the change process because they could see how it was going to benefit everybody on the team.
Yeah, I think that sort of completely puts into perspective what these games can do. And yeah, I think you'd never think of a game like that's how it would sort of come out. And I think it's really interesting because obviously extroverted people, yeah, they sort of react probably a lot quicker and do that side of things. But the introverted, yeah, they take a little while and maybe are a little bit quieter. So this sort of games completely flips both of them on their head and the roles of what they would usually be in sort of like society or the workplace. I think it's really nice to note things like requesting things ahead of time or changing a meeting that would suit both of them to be able to account for their different traits and sort of personalities there. I think it's also really good with the requesting info because some people will do sort of a fight or flight response if they react quickly to information. So if it's like, oh, I need to pull you for a meeting, it's like that information is quite a lot right on the middle of like the day. You need to get straight on a call and you feel like you haven't got time to process what's going to happen. Whereas like counting for this, having a little bit of time to think and put the meeting ahead, I think just like little things like this are good for assessing what works with different groups. So yeah, I really think
Yeah. Yeah. And back to your early question about structured play, like, that's another key element of it is the games almost end up being like a mirror for how individuals and teams act in certain situations. And so you think about what type of behavior, what type of situation or dynamic do you want the team to focus on? And so as part of the structure and experience design is looking at, is this a team that needs to work on collective decision making? Is this a team that needs to focus on different information processing styles? Is it a team that needs to work on hard conversations or giving feedback? I mean, there's, dozens and dozens of different types of dynamics that show up within games. And so you pick that dynamic that you want to work on, and then you can search. We have a whole database of games where you can search by what are the different mechanics and dynamics within that game. And then what do you prep people with beforehand? So you're drawing their attention to the elements of that experience. And it's very interesting because people can't help but show up as themselves. That's just a given. And even if we mentioned that fight or flight response, even if somebody's showing up in a really defensive way, it's because something is triggering that emotion within them. And it's a
exactly.
really good low stakes way to say, why is this making you so uncomfortable? What is so stressful about this? Is this something that you can work on? Is this something that your colleagues, if they know this about you, they can help you with? There's all these missed opportunities to support each other and to advocate for ourselves and to advocate for one another in the workplace that, if you don't look at them, if people are just frustrated all the time and feel like their colleagues are out to get them or don't understand them or they're not valued, which are horrible ways to feel and certainly get in the way of the quality of the work experience, the quality of the work itself, people's longevity within their roles.
Definitely, and that's all to do with psychological safety at the end of the day, because if people aren't feeling comfortable in the way that they're working themselves or with other people, then it's only going to cause them to feel like, yeah, as you said, not valued, not being productive, and in turn, they could leave the business, which is making the retention rates of the people that you're employing going to be a lot less because people aren't feeling safe and maybe understanding that they do work in a little bit of a different way. And I think it really shows that these sort of things can uncover either individual challenges or individual, maybe not weaknesses, but just sort of touch points that they may individually struggle with, which can tailor how they use their day. So I'd love to sort of go into this about a little bit more and see. I know you've mentioned how it can, there's those different elements and how it can really uncover um, hidden sort of individual or team challenges. Yeah, how do you think games can actually do this?
Yeah. If you think about any game, any activity, there's some sort of point to it. You're trying to solve some type of problem. There are games where it's you're trying to collect things, or there's all this information and you need to think strategically, and to apply different ideas of logic to unscramble it and solve it. There's competitive games where you need to outsmart other people or do something faster. So by it's really isolating what is it in a particular game that simulates the dynamic in the workplace, and giving that experience for a team to do something together, to have a shared experience together without any real life repercussions. It's psychological safety, but it's almost like a controlled experiment for how you work together. And some people could be a little bit uncomfortable with it as at first. I mean, part of the structure process is if there's a team that's really struggling, you don't jump right in and do a really hard and really competitive game. You want to start with something that's team bonding to get people to feel psychologically safe, to get them to feel open to the idea of learning and changing their behavior in the first place. And so,
Yeah,
for that, it's maybe you're picking 2 or 3 games to start to go down the iceberg and tackle some of the more superficial elements of the challenge before you get to the really meaty, important one.
yeah, and I think that helps people, as you said, feel psychologically safe with the people around them who they're doing the games with. They're feeling more comfortable, connected with those people, so they can start to sort of let their guard down and become their self. Maybe I know sometimes in the workplace, some people might have a little bit of a cover that maybe isn't so much themselves, but having that bonding at the beginning gives people the ability to sort of almost relax into it and actually act themselves, and then breaking that down, and you're only gonna uncover more the more and different types that you get involved
Yeah.
in.
And you have to help them parse through, first the self-awareness of we all have an instinctual feeling in any situation that we're in. You know, we feel comfortable, we feel uncomfortable. We tend to notice the negative feelings more, but it's helpful to notice in what situations do I really thrive? How am I feeling? What is this bringing out in me? And then once you can be self-aware to your experience of it, you can look at what are the elements of this situation that are impacting how you feel and what you're thinking. And that's when you sort of have to be able to identify those, because if you're not in touch with that, you're immediately going to think, I'm going to say, Leah just doesn't like me. She's just trying to sabotage me. She doesn't value what I say, which is totally not true. But because I feel uncomfortable in the situation, that's the quickest and easiest assumption for me to jump to. And so once people can see, oh, wow, we're all just having, even though we're doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, we're all having a different emotional reaction to it. And we are all bringing very different perspectives and, our own lived experience to this situation. And now we can start to pick apart these elements. And you have to get past those assumptions that you're making that are not necessarily serving you well. And maybe you're sabotaging your work and your relationships in order to say, great, so now how can we communicate better? How can we understand each other better so that our interactions um, are more satisfying, meaningful, so we can count on each other?
Yeah, I think that's such a great point because, yeah, having this self awareness, it can be tricky because identifying your own challenges and weaknesses is something that is difficult. So it's nice to have a relaxed sort of game environment to be able to uncover those. Because otherwise, if you are in a really tough project and you've got a deadline and you're stressed and nothing's working out and everything's sort of coming fast at you, you're not going to be able to know how to deal with that. But if you take sort of a project into, I said, a game, which is a lot lighthearted, you're going to be more self-aware of how you deal with a situation that has nothing to do with your work. It completely releases the stress of having it in a work environment, have it affect your success, your progress, your work happiness, your career, and then releasing that from it gives people the opportunity to sort of say, take a step back and think, okay, I approached it in this way, but three of the other people in the team didn't approach it this way, and two other people did it another way. And it's assessing how other people do it and think, oh, actually, I'd probably benefit more from going a little bit down that route. So they're actually really learning off each other as well as also learning about themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I believe really strongly that over the last 20 years, as technology has filled in more aspects of our lives, a lot of people have sort of lost the capacity and the time for that self-awareness. It used to be when you were commuting to work, you had, maybe you were listening to music or something, maybe you were reading, but you could still think, okay, what's in store for me today? How am I feeling? When you're waiting in line to get your coffee, you had time to be with your thoughts. Now we're distracting ourselves constantly with different apps and podcasts and games, just the really addictive games on your phone. And so there's not really time for just that check in. And it's such an important skill. Self awareness and self regulation are like humanity 101. And I really worry that people are losing that and see part of the mission of Barometer is how do you reverse engineer humanity into the experience of work when a lot of technology has stripped that piece out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that, again, that's being self aware of realizing that technology is constantly updating and changing and the way that we are, and it's only going to update and grow faster. So, making sure you have little times for like a daily check in or perhaps like a weekly like reflection, making sure that you have the tools to support you as much as possible so that you're not self sabotaging, stressing yourself out, being late on projects, just making sure that you're checking in with yourself. And I think things like manager one-to-ones, team meetings, and saying like, if there's anything that is too much on your plate, like don't be afraid to shout up. And again, going back to psychological safety, it's like having, if you feel comfortable that you can say that you're stressed because you have a big workload, then you're owning up and you're being self-aware of something that's already existing, which I think is a great start point.
Yeah. And I think about, I have a nephew who just turned 7, and he is the sweetest little boy. He's very, very sensitive. And, for the first 6 years of his life would have outrageous tantrums. They would come on out of nowhere. And what my brother and sister-in-law have been teaching him is that self-awareness and self-regulation. So it's the cutest thing. He'll say, you know what, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed right now, or I'm so tired, or I'm nervous. I just need to go sit by myself for a few minutes. And he'll go to the other room. And I look at him and I look at the news and I'm like, all of these grown-ups need to learn that skill to not just blow their top as soon as something slightly irritates them, something that in the long run is not a big deal at all. And that, my 7-year-old nephew will ask himself, is this a big deal? Is this not a big deal? Is this something, I can work through, or do I just need some time to myself to calm down? And my 7-year-old nephew can do it, and a lot of grown-ups can't.
That's just amazing, isn't it? I think, yeah, teaching things to people so that they can, yeah, be self-aware. And then going back to sort of these patterns of what people are finding out about themselves and things, do you see that there's any maybe common patterns that you see emerging when teams are engaging in play?
Yes. I would say 95% of the engagements we have with teams, one thing that comes out is we all live inside our own heads, and it's experienced by both nature and nurture. There's some personality traits that we're born with, but where did we grow up? What kind of education do we have? Where did we work before our current role? What beliefs do we? All of those things. What are our hobbies? All of that informs how we experience every situation that we're in. But we just assume that everybody thinks exactly the way that we do. And that's why we get so frustrated when things don't go exactly the way we think that they should. And it's amazing to me how profound the realization is when people realize, oh, you're thinking about this from a totally different angle because you worked at a different company before this job, or you came from this discipline, or even you grew up in another country and we use words differently. I think all of us could use, to stand to have that reminder every single day that we are one perspective of many. And there's a lot of value to our own perspectives. There's just as much value to other people's perspectives. And you need to make room for all of them. And so it's fascinating to me how many times this comes up, especially in the context of when you're communicating instructions or expectations for people. So if we're working on a project together, let's say I'm the project manager and I'm saying, this is what we need to do, this is how long we need to do it, I'm going to present it in a way that makes the most sense to me, but is also informed by all the other projects that I've worked on in my career and how I learned to manage. It might be totally different from you. So if I say something one time and say, okay, now go do it, and you bring it to me, and I say, this is not what I wanted at all. Why in the world would you have put it together this way? Well, that means when I explained it, there were a lot of gaps that my assumptions filled in that were not clear to you. And that's one of the biggest insights, is realizing that the way you explain things makes sense to you because of all the other stuff, in your head and in your past. And you have to spell it out a lot clearer for your expectations for other people, or it's really not fair to them. One of my biggest pet peeves is when managers, leaders criticize the performance of their teams and totally don't pay attention to the fact that they're not setting them up for success in how they communicate and what they're sharing and the preparations that are happening.
Yeah, I think like two really great things there. I think feeling frustrated when things maybe, aren't going your way, or one understanding how it didn't go your way. It's opening up and realizing that, there's so many other elements that have come to probably you making this decision that you aren't even aware of. And that's why so many people come to different decisions, because it's how they've learned, different environments, bringings, careers, cultures. There's so much behind that. So understanding that people can have different reactions to different scenarios is a really good touch point, and definitely going to be a common thing when this is sort of starting to happen and people are starting to play because things aren't maybe happening the right way they thought it would. Maybe they're losing, but which is not what everyone wants. So it's like trying to balance that frustration and realizing why, I think is a really good point.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
that's one of the things I think is so powerful about play, is because it gives people, they realize that they have more agency in most situations than they realize. Even little things that, what's your facial expression during a conversation, can have a huge impact on what the outcome of that conversation is going to be. And then people get excited once they realize you're not just victim of the circumstances, but there are a lot of opportunities, really small opportunities that you never would have noticed beforehand, to steer a conversation differently, or to look at a potential conflict or point of tension and help explore it before the emotions get involved. And
yeah,
people get excited to be part of that.
My lord, I see not how this pertaineth to the data analyst position.
If thou can extract a sword, thou can extract data. Thunder and badgers! From whence do ye hail, mighty peasant?
Vancouver!
Vancouver? Nay! We cannot employ internationally. The fees! The red tape! It must be put back. Be gone, Canadian!
Exactly. I think it's like, as you said, that's like the sort of, when you get into it, the build and development, it's probably going to be quite emotional, and people probably need to realize, because they are going to learn something about themselves. So opening up and realizing, sort of put your cards out on the table, realize maybe what you're going to learn from it, and be open with that. um, I think is sort of a great thing to go into it, but also what people are going to realize, that they're going to be frustrated, but they're going to find out a lot from this.
Yeah.
And
And that connects back to the structured element, because it's not just about picking the game and playing it, but really how do you help people process and make sense of it both during and afterwards? There's going to be discomfort. I mean, the process of change is uncomfortable, even if it's something that you want and you're really excited about. And so part of that structure is having a facilitator, a leader, somebody that can help with that, those understandings, those insights, and facing the more challenging feelings and more challenging thoughts that come out, and connecting them to the bigger picture, real life outcomes and goals that people are seeking. And that's, especially when you're getting into the deeper levels of the iceberg, you're probably going to spend more time reflecting and applying those reflections than you are playing, because that's where, it's the experiential learning cycle. And that's where you get people to understand how this relates, and think about how this can help them in real life and apply it to other situations.
yeah, exactly. I think we touched on like the leadership side of things here. That's going to be a really crucial element to making sure that this is working for what you want it to work for. So, is there any sort of practical steps that leaders can take to start making sure that they're fostering this safety through games, and also sort of, yeah, as you said, the end product, making sure that it's worth it in the end?
Yeah, I think the first thing leaders can think about, so many leaders say, I have an open door policy, I welcome feedback, I want ideas. But it's one thing to say it, but look at, are you actually making space for it? Is there literally time in your day when people can call you or come into your office or Slack you with ideas, or with feedback? And how do you respond when they do? Are you welcoming it, or are you like, okay, I'll get to that later? Again, those little micro moments that are really going to affect the outcome of the interaction. And so for leaders who really want, really embrace that there's no bad ideas, no dumb questions, you have to show people that that's a real thing, and that's something that you're not going to penalize them for. And so just doing little creative thinking improv type games, where the point's not to be funny. The point is just to get people thinking very quickly and okay sharing ideas, and see that nothing bad is going to happen if you say something that's not correct or perfect, or if you ask a question that maybe was obvious to some people but probably isn't obvious to everybody. And people have to experience that psychological safety before they can fully trust that it's going to be there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that makes it, even though it's going to be fun, it's also needs to be serious, because you're making sure that what you're putting into this is getting a result, which is, it's probably going to affect someone, but hopefully in a good way, because they're able to digest what's happened and be able to sort of facilitate that and make good out, really.
Yeah, and I think another really great opportunity for anyone who's in any type of leadership position, there's an element of giving feedback, along the way. And a lot of people are profoundly uncomfortable giving feedback. A lot of people are profoundly uncomfortable getting feedback. So for leaders, there's little games that you can play where there's, even in how you explain a game, and then saying, was I clear in how I explained it? Is there a way I could have explained it better to you? So you would have felt more comfortable. And doing that rather than, waiting for somebody to return work that's not of the quality that you wanted and getting mad at them. Proactively figure out, how do you communicate with different people? What are their needs? What are their priorities? What motivates them? And then as a leader, you're now more positioned to get better performance and engagement from people. So I think that's another really easy opportunity to bring some games in, for how to lead individuals and teams.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the feedback element, is so important, because if you're, as you said, explaining something and giving them the option, do you understand anything here? Or do you actually have any questions? And keeping that the open ness, so that then they can go into their priority and what their motivations are, as you just said. And yeah, having like these welcoming moments of connection, touch, so that people can come to you and ask you. I think that sort of goes through into the safety. But I know, working in remote teams and distributed teams, global teams, this obviously can be a little bit more difficult. So how would you sort of say that play can perhaps work with remote teams, and how do we sort of make sure that safety element is implied into those remote teams as well?
Yeah, I love that that's what you are thinking about, and that's so much of what you're doing with this podcast, because the remote experience is very different. Not in a not good, not bad. It's just really different. It can remote work can be amazing, but you have to realize what you don't automatically get with remote work are those little serendipitous moments for building connection and building relationships. Conversations in the hallway, or sitting next to each other at a meeting and like laughing at something that happens, and that moment of shared laughter and shared experience. So with remote teams, you have to build in intentional time for those connections, because when you're on a Zoom, it just doesn't happen. You can't have those little side moments, or it's much harder. The vast majority, so we have a whole database of about 120 games. We're always adding to it, that people can search through to find what's the right game. And the vast majority of them can be done digitally, as well as in person. And so just making time for building those relationships is the first thing. I hear a lot of leaders talk about when we have meetings, everybody's camera is off. Well, maybe understand why. Is it that they don't feel like the meeting is valuable, and so they're multitasking? Is it that they, in a lot of these meetings, the communication is sort of brutal and they don't want their facial expressions to show? Is it just that people don't necessarily feel comfortable with it, but could if they saw that other people were? So just getting to know little things like that, and being able to intentionally set expectations and the culture for how you want people to show up, like that's so important. And then to get into, communicating, even if it's over video or over Slack, you miss out on a lot of communication channels, all the nonverbal, all the body language, feeling someone's energy. And so practicing using the communication channels that are available to you when you work virtually, and recognize, again, what assumptions are you making? Some people will say, I don't like your tone in Slack. Well, you're probably attaching that tone as the reader. That very likely is not what the message sender intended. And so just recognizing that, and figuring out ways to communicate tone, or to shed some of those assumptions that, maybe make us see conflict or tension or problems where there isn't any. So I think it's really important for remote teams to make those times to intentionally get to know each other, intentionally look at how they communicate, intentionally look at how can we best use these different tools at our disposal to work together well.
Yeah, I think that's like the key word there, isn't it? Intentional, is that you have to be intentional with everything that you're doing, setting expectations, setting your work hours, making sure they're clear, the communication, um, feedback, making sure that that is all clear and communicated well, so that everybody understands what their expectation is. And I think if there's no sort of expectation, I think that goes back to like the feedback element as well. If that's not all in place, then people don't know what's expected of them. So they can, yeah, cameras will be off, communication may be low, because they don't know that it's expected to put on your Slack when you're finished work, for example. I don't know how that may be, but yeah, having those expectations. And I think things like, I know in like Google Calendar, you can set your hours. And if someone tries to book something in your calendar, you've got an out of office or a sort of out of work hours thing that'll pop up. So yeah, those elements of expectation are going to help people build that psychological safety, which will help to start that sort of foundation for when people do want to do bonding and team play. Because yeah, as you say, like in remote teams, those water cooler moments are much harder to grasp if you don't have moments that are set aside to speak about people's weekend, or if there's anything outside of work that they want to touch on. And I think things like Slack channels, which can open up how people live and in their culture and their country and things like that, adds that element of safety, which helps people to bond and will be better for um, these elements of play.
Yeah, that reminds me of another really common insight that happens with remote teams. You're not seeing each other in the office. So you don't really know who are the morning people and who are the, later in the day people. And that's often a point of frustration. I sent you this message 4 hours ago and you still haven't responded. Well, you sent it at 6 in the morning.
It's like,
I got up at 6 in the morning, and just recognizing again, like, what are our patterns and what are our expectations and how are they different? And, maybe if I have a really tough question for you, knowing that your brain is at its best later in the day. Well, I shouldn't send you something, or schedule a meeting first thing in the morning with you. So just those little things that, unless you purposefully talk about them and get to know them about different people, I think of it as like tripwires. Like, we all have these different preferences and pet peeves and motivators and fears. And if you don't know them about yourself and about other people, you're constantly going to be tripping the bad ones and missing the good ones. And play is such a great way to bring those into the light and talk about them. So then you can just be more mindful of how you're approaching other people to get the best out of everybody.
yeah, I think that's literally what we've said. So obviously remote work does come with its challenges. And if leaders can look at this as a way to help those, then I think that's a really great point. And how can leaders perhaps use these games to fix or address issues like perhaps disengagement, misalignment, things like this?
Yeah, it's really it's interesting because a lot of people get very hung up on what's the subject matter of the game itself, and it's much less about the game itself than how people have to think, how the experience is going to make them feel, and how they behave and interact within the context of the game. And that's really what we're doing, with the structure we're doing, is teaching leaders, teaching HR professionals, teaching other trainers, how do you use play strategically in this way? The structure does refer to that strategy, that intentionality of the experience, um, and really isolating and simulating those scenarios that affect work, but just within the context of the game.
Yeah, definitely. It's making sure that I said everything is structured and the strategy behind it so that you are specifically addressing those challenges. And then, do you have any recommendations of like a remote friendly game that someone could jump into if a distributed team wanted to maybe start looking at this?
Yeah, there is one of my favorites. It's called Fishbowl. It's a party game that a lot of people play. Sometimes it's called Bob or Word Salad, but there's actually a really nice app for it. Um, it's just fishbowl-game.com. And it's one of those games where everybody writes words down on a little note card, on a virtual note card, and it splits people up into teams. And then it goes back and forth between the teams, or one person on each team. In the first round, they describe the word and their teammates have to guess. And, you go back and forth until between the two teams, all the words have been guessed. And then all the clues go back in. And in the second round, instead of describing it, it's charades. You have to act it out. Same thing, you finish, you put it back in. And then if you get to the third round, it's just a one-word clue. And so you have three very different sets of constraints around communication. People play different roles, whether they're the ones giving the clues or guessing. So there's a lot of different types of skills that fall into it. It's really fun. It is great for creating inside jokes. It's really easy to set up and play. I think that's just a really great one for teams to do.
Definitely, yeah. Me and my friends even play this on holiday, so it's a good game to get everyone excited. And also on a holiday where I didn't know like half of the group, and that was a really good way of bonding and sort of opening up in a little bit of a fun and jokey way. So I think that's a nice way. But I know sometimes these games may feel like a little bit forced and like cheesy. Maybe not this one in particular, but sometimes it may feel like they're only like a HR leader may just be doing it to tick a box. So is there any way that leaders can introduce games, making sure that they're not forced, cheesy, but actually intentional and strategic?
Yeah, I think being very transparent is why we're playing this game at this time. Even saying something is, hey, we've had some new people join. Not everybody knows each other. I think it'd be really great for us to just learn a little bit about each other, have some fun. Laughter and shared joyous experiences are such a good way to catalyze relationships. Just as you said, when you're on holiday and getting to know the people you didn't know as well. That's really important. So we're going to do this. And if you don't want to play a person, you just want to observe, that's totally fine. So telling them exactly what you want them to experience. And then at the end saying, what did you notice? How are you feeling? Did you learn anything interesting? Or what are you going to remember about this to help solidify it as an experience? And I think that's why so much play at work falls flat, is because people are not given clear expectations of how to engage and what you're supposed to get out of it. And then there's no connection at the end to how is this going to help you? Why did you spend your time on this? Why did you risk being vulnerable? Play is a very vulnerable thing. And so I think those bookends, adding the structural points. And that's really what we have a whole bunch of tools to help leaders, to help HR professionals uh, bring that structure, say connect the game. How do you frame it at the beginning so people know what to pay attention to? How do you debrief it at the end so they can see what the benefit was and use that experience as the catalyst for more growth, more development, building better connections, changing their culture.
Yeah, and I think that pulls into making sure that you're setting expectations, whether that's in the office or remotely, making sure that pre-structured game, you're setting the expectation for what's going to happen, maybe what you're going to find out, little sort of pointers so that people are ready to open up and find out stuff about themselves, which is what everyone wants to do. Everyone wants to self-progress in their self-career. And I think having that opportunity too and being able to look at yourself in a little bit different angle is only going to
Yeah.
benefit you. So making sure that they feel that way as well.
Yeah, and prepare them for it. I mean, sometimes you go to see a movie and it's advertised as a comedy and it's actually like really scary, or there's like something pretty traumatic in it. And you're like, I was not prepared for this at all. And for me, that I'm like, I don't like this movie, even if it's a really good movie, even if, the next day when I reflect on it, I think it was a really good movie because that was so unexpected. It really changed the experience. So telling people, preparing them for, hey, this might bring up some uncomfortable ideas, or you might feel a little self-conscious, but the purpose is how do we work through this and how do we support each other through it?
Yeah. And at any moment, if you are feeling too uncomfortable, don't worry. We can take a moment. You can step away, but let's just address maybe why you are feeling so uncomfortable so we can rectify that and help you moving forward in the future. I think that's really a nice tip. And then speaking about tips, actually, let's do a little last section, rapid fire, just to get a little bit more out of you and your expertise. So, do you have one tip for leaders trying to build trust remotely and perhaps maybe using structured games to, create psychological safety?
Yeah, I think it's so important for leaders to model the culture that they want to see and to look for opportunities where they can model it. Um, and so think about what are one or two elements of culture that are particularly important, and how can you, create a game experience where that's going to happen. And point people's attention to, hey, you see how we're having so much fun? You see how we're laughing? That's because this element of culture is present. And to show that you're all in it. I see, you know, hear a lot of stories, see examples of leaders that are like, I'm perfect. It's you all who have to change. And if that's your outlook, you're you're toast. Like, you're never going to create that culture. You have to be part of the journey and show them that you're willing to change, that you're actively listening, that you're willing to be vulnerable and push through discomfort too.
Yeah, I think that's key, isn't it? Not just only the teams below you, but also you getting involved as well as a leader, showing that you are willing to be vulnerable in these games. And that will only build more trust with the team surrounding you, knowing that you will actually be involved and sort of like same level because you're all doing the challenge or game together and solving the same problem. It sort of brings that that level of trust. So that's and then it brings it back to your culture and what you're wanting to get out of your business and the business success, because that all brings it back to why you're working at the company. So yeah, really like that one. And then is there anything that you found out to be like really surprising that a team's discovered through a game? I know we've mentioned the previous thing about the extrovert and introvert, but yeah, is there anything that's really good and surprising that you found out from using sort of structured play?
Yeah, people have really interesting and nuanced opinions and assumptions about things that you don't ever really know until it comes up. And that's just so fascinating to me. Is There's a game that I really love, another one I highly recommend. It's called Priorities. And there's a bunch of cards that have words on it, and you rank your order of, I prefer these things the most, prefer these things to the least. And other people try to guess your order. And it's so fascinating. In one of we train people on how to facilitate games. And in one of the cohorts, we were playing this game, and one of the women had a really strong negative emotion about the winky face emoji. She hated it. She interpreted it as rude. She thought it was really annoying. And just it just sort of opens your mind to, we all have so much going on inside of our heads, and we all attach meaning to different words and different icons and different experiences, and that that's so interesting. Like, that should be a reason to want to pursue relationships with your colleagues, and not just interact with them on the surface level, but get to know them as people, and a little more three-dimensional. And so that's when I think those little surprises where someone a little bit better and you understand them a little bit more. And once you have those moments, it just deepens the relationship, and deepens, opens up so many more doors for possibilities for how, collaboration can happen.
Yeah,
Um,
and those reactions of the reaction of what that person gives, it gives a three-dimensional view, because obviously at the moment we're very 2D, being remote and having that element of understanding people's traits, personalities is only gonna make that sort of bond better, which will only develop the relationship and the career and better things like that. So final summary then, do you think there's one structured game that everyone should try?
oh gosh. I just won. That's so tough. I love the game Telestrations. And there's a really good, I think it's Gartic. Um, I can't remember what the virtual company does it, but it's like the game Telephone, you alternate between guessing a word and drawing a picture. So, let's say I'm drawing pencil, and my word is pencil, so I draw a pencil, and then you look at the drawing and you're like, oh, this looks like a rocket ship, and then the next person looks at what you said, and they draw a rocket ship, and then the next person was like, oh, this looks like some. um it's just really fun. I've never played it where people's faces didn't hurt from laughing at the end of it. If you just go online and search for virtual telestrations, you'll get a couple of different options. That's one of my absolute favorites.
Yeah, and I think it brings it back to like that openness and why like laughter actually does It helps you feel good. You release endorphins. It's a stress reliever, and having that only helps you build more connection, boosts creativity because you're feeling sort of happy and you want to sort of problem solve. And you're able to sort of, as you said, have those inside jokes, and only makes the culture from the inside that little bit stronger because you all feel like you bonded a little bit on a little funny sort of game there. So yeah, I really like that. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge on this topic. It's really interesting to me. I really love games sort of outside the office. So this sort of element of leveraging structured games to improve team dynamics is so interesting. I think we've covered a lot from the structured games, why they matter, uncovering those team weaknesses and challenges, role of psychological safety in the workplace and also with remote teams, and then overcoming those and how we can sort of introduce them and make sure that people are feeling that they can get involved and understand that it's going to be something that's going to help them themselves. So thank you so much for joining us, Alec. And thanks everyone for listening on this episode of the Freedom of Work podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.